When building CSS layouts, one of the most important things that you can do is to make sure that your website is responsive. This means making sure that it looks good on all devices, whether mobile, tablet, or desktop. These all have different screen sizes, and the bigger the screen, the bigger the text and other content needs to be in order to be readable. For example, if you have a website with a title text of 24 pixels tall, you won't have any trouble reading that on your mobile device. But if that same website is displayed on a TV or a large presentation screen and the text is still only 24 pixels tall, it's going to be practically microscopic and no one is going to be able to read it. So to ensure that your website looks good on all screen sizes, you need to write your CSS so that it will adjust the size and the layout of elements depending on how large the screen is. And the simplest way to do this is with media queries. Media queries allow you to detect different conditions that a user's device may be using, like their screen size and whether they prefer dark or light mode, and then apply specific CSS styles depending on those conditions. Now, there are a ton of different conditions that you can check for, but for responsive styles, we're mainly targeting different widths of the screen or browser window, which is also called the viewport. So let me show you how to write a media query in your styles. All right, so I have VS Code here on the left, and I have Firefox here on the right, and we are loading this website. So let's take a look at the files. In the HTML, we have an image of a dog, and we have some text underneath with an H1 tag with this title, and then we have a paragraph tag. And if we go into our styles, I do have a lot of existing styles just for the UI, but we're mainly going to be looking at the text tags down here and their font size. Now, if we look at our text, let's say that I want the H1 tag to get bigger on tablet and desktop devices, like maybe going from 24 pixels on mobile to 48 pixels on tablet. And to make this happen, I can do this by adding a media query inside the H1 tag. And we can do this by typing @media, and then in parentheses, we can write the condition where we want to use the different styles. So for viewport width, we can write width, and then I'm usually going to use the greater than or equal to symbols, and then a specific width that we want to change the styles at. But what viewport width should we target? Devices have all different screen sizes, but usually mobile phones are going to be somewhere around 300 to 400 pixels wide. Tablets could be 700 to 800 pixels wide, and then desktop screens can be anywhere from 1200, 1400, and on up. But you don't have to write a separate individual media query for every single possible device, because that would be a little bit overkill. Instead, what I usually do is writing one, sometimes two media queries, just targeting a general range. So for myself, to go between mobile to tablet styles, I'll target a width that's maybe 640 pixels. So we can write that here and then add some curly braces. And then let's say for between tablet and desktop, you could write something around 900 to 1000 pixels. We're just going to stick with this one media query in this example. And also just an FYI, the width that we're targeting in our media query is often called the breakpoint. This is because this is the point at which the design will break and we need to change to a new one. So in here, we'll set font size to, I think I said 48 pixels. However, for accessibility, it is better to use rem units for measurements for definitely font size and also for media queries. So what are rem units? Rem units are based on your browser's base font settings, which by default is 16 pixels. So this means one rem equals 16 pixels. And the reason that you want to use rems is because the styles set in rems are going to scale with your browser base font size. So if you change it, it'll change with that. Whereas if you set numbers in pixels like we currently have, they are not going to change. And I'll show you more what this actually looks like in a little bit. So let's first convert from pixels to rems for our H1 styles. So one rem is 16 pixels, so we can convert from pixels to rems by dividing it by 16. So I am going to pull out the calculator here. So let's start with the media query actually. So 640 pixels divided by 16 equals 40 rems. So instead of 640 pixels, we can type 40 rems. And sometimes just as a little reminder, I'll add a comment and I'll write the pixel values just so we can eyeball it a bit quicker. So that's the media query. We can also do 24 pixels divided by 16 is 1.5 rems. And again, I like to add a little comment with the pixel size. And then 48 pixels is divided by 16 is 3 rems. Oops. There we go. And then lastly, we have the paragraph at 16 pixels, and I usually can remember 16 pixels equals 1 rem, so I'm not going to add a comment for the paragraph. Okay, so we got everything changed to rems. So we also want to compare how rems will behave when compared with pixels. So I'm going to create a new paragraph. I'll just duplicate the one we have. And I'm going to give the second one a class of pixel. So now we have these two paragraphs down here. And I want to set the pixel paragraph, the second one, using font size in pixels. So I'm going to say pixel class font size 16 pixels. So right now they are the same because, again, 16 pixels equals 1 rems. So this one is in rems and the second one is in pixels. So you can change that conversion rate in our browser settings. So I'm here in the Firefox settings, and here in the fonts, we can change our font size. So you can see here it says 16. Let's make it bigger. I'm going to say maybe 24. Then when we go back to our website and we reload, you can see that the H1 tag and the paragraph got bigger, but the second paragraph did not. And let me just scoot this over here. So the reason that the pixel value didn't change is because pixels are what's called an absolute unit. They are not dependent on anything else. They will always be 16 pixels or whatever size you have. Now, to compare with that, rems are what's called a relative unit. And there's other relative units. Rems are just one of them. They're called relative because their final value is dependent on something else. And rems is short for root, em, or m unit. And the root refers to the root document of the website, which is the HTML tag, which is, contains the entire website. And you can change the font size of the HTML tag, the root, with the browser settings, which is what we just did. So when we use rems to size things like font size, this is good for users because users who want to change the font size on websites can just go to their browser settings and change it. And I know that you can zoom in and out as well to change the text display, but the browser settings still exist, so I think it is good to make sure that they do what the user might be expecting it to do. In addition, when you change the font size in your browser settings, it is going to affect all websites. When you zoom, you have to manually zoom for every single one individually, which takes a little bit more time. All right, so I'm going to go back to the 16 pixel size and let's reload. So going back to our media query for the H1 tag, we are now changing the font size when we hit 640 pixels, and we're going from 24 to 48. So right now I'm loading the website on an emulated iPhone, which is 393 pixels. So if I increase the viewport width, once we hit 640, which is right here, you can see that the text gets bigger. And also, when we go back below that 640 breakpoint, it goes back to the smaller 24 pixel size. So one note when you're writing media queries, we could also, instead of width greater than or equal to 40 rems, we could write width of less than 40 rems, and then we would just have to switch these two styles, whichever one is inside the media query. What we're doing now is what's called the mobile first approach, where you have the default styles, meaning styles not inside a media query. These ones here are going to be used on mobile, and then you add media queries at progressively larger widths for the larger screen sizes, and then change the styles in the media query. The reason that we do this is because usually you have the more complex designs on the website requiring more style rules for those larger viewport widths. And then the simpler styles on mobile require fewer styles. For example, let's say we wanted to put the image and the text side by side on larger viewports. We would write additional styles for that 2-column layout. So just here for the grid class, which contains all the content that we have here right now, we'd say display grid at a gap of 20 pixels. So now we have a grid, and then we'll say at media width greater than or equal to 40 rems. And we'll change the layout here by setting grid template columns to repeat 2, 1 FR. And then align items center to vertically center them. So now, if I zoom out, when we get above 640, we change to a 2-column layout. And here's the mobile styles back to 1 column. Putting this 2-column layout styles inside the media query means that it's only going to be added on for larger devices, and they're not affecting the mobile styles. And we could do it the other way, so we could make the desktop styles the default by putting them outside the media query. And then instead of greater than, we would do less than 40 rems. And in here, we would have to change the grid template to 1 column for mobile. So grid template columns, 1 FR. And this does accomplish the same thing. We go from 2 columns to 1 column, but we have to write an additional line that we didn't have to before to cancel out the added style from before. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 styles that we had to write. Before, we only had to write 1, 2, 3, 4. So I know it's only 1 line less, but these things can add up if you have really complex styles for your desktop styles. Now, there are exceptions to the mobile-first approach, like when you have a hamburger mobile menu, which is a lot more complex and requires more styles than the desktop navigation usually. In those cases, you would want to use a media query that targets less than your breakpoint width for mobile devices. So the bottom line is when you have different styles for different devices, write the simpler styles as your default and then put the more complex ones inside the media query. All right, and that's the basics of how media queries work. I hope you found this video helpful. Let me know down in the comments if you liked it, and if you did, also don't forget to leave a thumbs up. I would really appreciate it. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.